I think for a long time people did not respect the profession of architecture, and it was seen as a service, and it was like the duty of the architect to always kind of dumb down the idea. But I think you can still maintain the central idea, but you can make it work.
So can you think of a particular example to share with us?
I mean, I think that, for example, when we very early on when we were doing the Vitra fire station, I mean, the budget was very small. It was kind of, at the time, the engineering was quite, it was very difficult, not difficult, kind of ambitious structural project, and we had to kind of really reduce the elements to only the most required elements. So every element in the project acts as a structural element, and there was no other extra. So let's say there was no decorative elements. So it was purely based on structure and requirement of spatial requirement. And that, one can achieve these things with that. But, I think you come across it many times, whether, in project you have to change, you have to reduce the budget. I mean, of course, something that you reduce the budget by half, you can't do it. But if you can reduce it by a bit, then you can.
And you just spoke about something from earlier in your career. What's changed in terms of how you approach new projects, if anything? Has anything changed in terms of how you approach things over the last 30 years?
No, I mean, of course, in the office, the team has changed. I mean, we were 10 people, and now we are 400 people. So the dynamic is not the same, and also the work method has changed. Before we used to do, let's say, a lot of sketching and model making and painting, and now a lot of it is done kind of through computer, and not because the computer is taken over. It's just that it's a different method of work.
Well, I've always I've never really gone out looking for work. I always waited for it to sort of hit me on the head. And when I started out, I thought that architecture was a service business and that you had to please the clients and stuff. And I realized when I'd come into the meetings with these corrugated metal and chain link stuff, and people would just look at me like I just landed from Mars. But I couldn't do anything else. That was my response to the people in the time. And actually it was responding to clients that I had that didn't have very much money, so they couldn't afford very much. I think it was circumstantial. Until I got to my house, where the client was my wife. We bought this tiny little bungalow in Santa Monica, and for like 50 grand, I built a house around it, and a few people got excited about it. I was visiting with an artist, Michael Heiser, out in the desert near Las Vegas somewhere. He's building this huge concrete place, and it was late in the evening. We'd had a lot to drink. We were standing out in the desert all alone, and he said, thinking about my house, he said, did it ever occur to you if you built stuff more permanent, somewhere in 2,000 years, somebody's going to like it? So I thought, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Luckily, I started to get some clients that had a little more money, so the stuff was a little more permanent. But I just found out the world ain't gonna last that long. This guy was telling us the other day. So where do we go now? Back to temporary, everything's so temporary. I don't see it the way you characterized it, Richard, obviously. For me, every day is a new thing. I approach each project with a new insecurity, almost like the first project I ever did. And I get the sweats, I go in, start working, I'm not sure where I'm going. If I knew where I was going, I wouldn't do it. When I can predict or plan it, I don't do it, I discard it. So I approach it with the same trepidation. I mean, obviously, over time, I have a lot more confidence that it's gonna be okay. I do run a kind of a business. I got 120 people, and you got to pay them, and so there's a lot of responsibility involved. But the actual work on the project is with, I think, a healthy insecurity, And like the playwright said the other day, I could relate to him that you're not sure. And when you look at it, when Bilbao was finished and I looked at it, I saw all the mistakes. They weren't mistakes. I saw everything that I would have changed. And I thought I was embarrassed by it. I felt an embarrassment. How could I have done that? How could I have made shapes like that or done stuff like that? It's taken several years to now look at it detached and say, as you walk around the corner and a piece of it works with the road and the street and it appears to have a relationship, that I started to like it.
When did you first decide to make architecture your life work?
Well, fortunately, I never had to decide. It was decided for me before I was born. My mother was a teacher, and she wanted an architect for a son. I happened to be the son, and of course, naturally, an architect. I was conditioned by her. The room into which I was born was hung with the wood engravings of the English cathedrals made by Timothy Cole. Do you remember those? So I was born into architecture.
What was your first job as an architect, Mr. Wright?
Well, I think I wanted to be an architect, and as near as I could get to it. In Madison, we were poor. We had no money to send me to an architectural school, and Madison, our home, had an engineering school, and a very kind dean, Professor Conover, gave me a stipend to work for him and work my way through the course at the university, and I worked my way almost through it. If I'd stayed 3 months longer, I would have been given a degree as an engineer, but I was anxious to be an architect, and so I started out for Chicago 3 months before I would have graduated. And I suppose you could say that my work for Conover, perhaps, as an engineer, designing clips and little details of ironwork, was my first architectural job.
Would you say that any of Sullivan's ideas in architecture influenced you at that time?
Naturally. They were influencing nearly everybody in the country.
How so?
He was the real radical of his day, and his thought gave us the skyscraper. You see, the building was, when buildings first began to be tall, they didn't know how to make them tall. They would put one 2-story or 3-story building on top of another until they had enough. And I remember Lieber Meister would come in and throw something on my table, the Wainwright building in St. Louis. He said, "Wright, the thing is tall. What's the matter with a tall building?" And there it was, tall. And after that, why, the skyscraper began to flourish. And I think all the skyscrapers you see today were the result of Louis Sullivan's initiative. And that was his kind of mind, his type of thought. You see, he saw the thing directly for what it was.